So tonight I'm going to talk about working with our narratives or our stories. When I first started working or working on my practice in Buddhism, the instructions for the meditation practice was to let go of the stories. And I formed this perception that stories were bad and that we're supposed to not have storytelling mind. And I had resistance to the storytelling mind. And it took me a while to realize that it's not about um, stopping the mind from creating stories or narratives, right? In fact, when you study the Buddhist path, most of the Buddhist path is taught through stories. The Buddha gave a lot of analogies and stories, the stories of conversations he had or experiences that he had to help us be able to frame this practice in a way that contextualizes our practice so that we can understand it and integrate it into our daily lives, right? Stories are very important and they're powerful. When I did some neuroscience, a little bit of neuroscience junkie, I like to study little things, just understand mindfulness and the mind better. It's taught that the mind is a storytelling mind, and that we only understand our own experience in relationship to all other experiences that we've had, right? And so that we actually, our parents tell us stories, we have things that happen to us, experiences, um, and through the Bible and other spiritual teachings are also told in story form as well. And what's really interesting in Buddhism, the Buddha taught about dependent origination, and I won't go too deep into dependent origination, the teachings, but basically what the teachings were is that all things in the conditioned mind give birth to other conditioned things, right? So because this existed, then I experienced that, and because that experienced, now I experienced this. So this gives birth to that, which gives birth to that, which gives birth. So all the conditions that come together create the experience that I'm having right now, right? Which is very much in alignment with our stories and how we experience life. Yeah. Stories teach us lessons, they evoke emotions, they awaken parts of ourselves that we didn't know existed or had forgotten were even there. Show of hands, how many people watch movie and start crying and feel more gratitude or love or you know, or maybe we remember someone that you once knew and you suddenly long to be able to connect to that person again based on another story that we've heard. So stories can connect us. They can connect us to one another. They can connect us to ourselves. So they're very positive things, the stories. And your own generations, your own family has shared stories. All of our ancestors and what they had to go through, and they passed on their shared stories and shared traumas onto us. So we're born into a particular narrative. We're born into a family narrative. We're born into a cultural narrative. You notice how different cultures have totally different narratives. We're born into group narratives, spiritual narratives, you name it. We're conditioned in certain narratives. And these stories, they mold us in certain ways. They mold us into becoming who we are today. We are almost, we can say, a product of all of our narratives and understandings of what's happened before us today. I had a huge victim narrative in my when I started practicing, you bring mindfulness to your experience. I noticed that I tended to be the big victim of every experience. Oh, poor me. So and so did, something wrong to me, or oh, poor me, the government's trying to take all my money through taxes, or oh, poor me, this person did that to me, whatever. Poor me, I'm female. Poor me, I'm Palestinian, on and on and on. And, when I study my family, I had hardworking, illiterate farmers on one side and menial, hardworking, nearly illiterate or poor people on the other side, and they had a lot of hardships and they actually they were victims in a lot of ways. So they passed that down so that I could be primed to be hardworking. That I had believed that I had to scratch out a living because that was my ancestors and parents' stories, that life is hard and you've got to work hard and you barely just to survive and you're going to be a victim. Ah, great narratives. That was really helping me be happy. Yeah, not too much. But I had to see my conditioning and these narratives and how they were showing up in the way I was thinking and the way I was acting, because from our thoughts spring our actions, right? Um, yeah. So Buddhism is taught through these stories, a lot of similes of interactions with the Buddha. Um, and I usually mention a lot of these similes. The simile of the mustard seed, you may have heard, is the story where the woman's baby died and she went to the Buddha asking him to bring the baby back to life. And he said to go to a family and get 3 mustard seeds from a family who has never experienced death, and then I'll bring your baby back to life. You may have heard this one. And so she went, every household had experienced death. And then she finally realized, oh, this is the nature of the human existence. Everyone loses people that they love. So she was able to stop trying to bring her baby to life and bury it. And she actually became part of the Buddha's order. But anyhow, there are a lot of spiritual stories from the Buddha about how other spiritual teachers came to argue with him. They're arguing their point of view, which, according to the Buddha's teachings, was not in alignment with wisdom. And the Buddha always won these arguments, by the way. But you hear the two sides, they're interesting. But we make up stories about everything, ourselves, others, the world. They're colored by our views. But the thing is about these stories, when we want to bring mindfulness to our stories, right? Don't just say, oh, go away, story. Nope, nope, story. Actually, you want to be aware of your stories. You want to look at the nature of your stories and see if there's primary themes or emotions that arise with your stories. It's hard not to get lost in our stories. It's hard when we do get lost in our stories. And it's hard not to believe them wholesale 100%, because our stories usually have some truth in them. Facts. We usually find some good facts that we pull into our story to make it believable, right? So there's some factual observation, but a lot of other things are based on our perception. So there's a lot of our stories are made up, totally made up. We get a few facts, then we make everything up around it. I heard a Hidden Brain series on NPR once that said that according to the studies that they've done, that most of our perceptions are not accurate, right? So most of our perceptions are not accurate. There's all kinds of studies. They brought people in and they showed them different situations and asked them about themselves. They tested them, they reacted a certain way, and they asked them why, and they made up a story. I don't remember the nature of that study, but it was funny that people were making up totally inaccurate stories to explain their experiences. I did jury duty this week. I got called into jury duty. And before we went into the courtroom, everybody there who was talking was complaining and lamenting they did not want to be there. And I was thinking, yeah, I don't want to be here either, but I'm here to do my civic duty or whatever. And then when I went into the courtroom, they did not call me, but I was there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. and they were fiddling around trying to pick a jury. It was anyhow. So I'm sitting there, and every person they called up there, they're asking them questions and interviewing them and whatever. And I'm listening and watching these people, and I saw my storytelling mind make up all kinds of crazy stories about about each person. I'd be like, "Oh, she's full of BS. She's trying to get out. She's making all these excuses." I see some guy talking, and he said, "Well, I have a hard time imagining anybody's innocence." And then I was making up a story. Oh, he's working it, trying to get out of jury duty. Yeah. uh, so I was able to watch his judgmental mind and story making mind. It was really going for it. Looking at this one really tan woman wearing the finest clothing, and she owned a lot of businesses, and her husband owned half of a bunch of businesses. I was making up the story. That privileged woman, she's never had to work a hard day in her life. She's never had to, I bet she's an alcoholic. I bet she sits and drinks a bottle of wine every night. It's crazy to watch a story making mind. And anyhow, it was amusing, or this person looks like a homeless person, or whatever, whatever. So the mind is going to make up stories. That's what it does. That's not the problem. Its problem is believing the stories, right? Because that's what the mind does. It makes up stories in order to see how we can relate to the world. Is this person safe to approach? Is this person's someone I should push away from? Someone that I should be wary of? You know. So, according to Buddhist teachings, if we follow the Buddha's instructions, this is in the 5 aggregates, right? The ear connects to an object that makes sound, and then hearing consciousness occurs. These are the aggregates, right? And then a feeling tone arises with hearing consciousness, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. These feeling tones happen automatically. Hearing consciousness happens automatically. And then what is heard is processed through our perception. Perceptive part of the brain. Perception recognizes what we're hearing, and then this information is sent to other parts of our brain where we recognize the sounds. Then thinking happens, right? And then from thinking, we make up all these storatives and narratives that are developed, and then we have an emotional reaction: anger, confusion, joy, right? Pleasure, whatever it is. And the Buddha, now neuroscience is saying the same thing, but the Buddha explained this 2,500 years ago very clearly, right? So where do things get made up? They get made up through this process. Our narratives are woven through this process, through a perception, which is our perceptions are filtered through our conditioned mind. Right? So based on how I was raised and my culture and my experiences, all the conditions that came together and helped create this conditioned mind, my history, will color my perceptions and color my thoughts, right? Not everybody has the same experiences. Not everybody makes up the same stories. We make up different stories based on our conditioning, right? This is why different people can all be told the same story or be at the same event and have totally different perception or experiences of what happened, right? So our instructions in meditation and in mindfulness is to stay with and be mindfully aware of our predominant experience each moment as it arises. Be aware of our feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, right? So hearing, pleasant, hearing, unpleasant, thinking, neutral, or thinking, unpleasant, or fantasizing, pleasant, yeah? And if we're not able to be with our predominant experience and then the feeling tone, the Vedana, the mind will proliferate into all the different thinking and emotions and everything else, usually. But, we can't be mindfully aware of the thinking mind all the time. Yeah. But we want to be aware of the stories and narratives we hear the mind making up. And also the stories that other people are telling us. Do we believe what everybody tells us 100%, or do we hold their stories lightly and realize, oh, their story is colored by their conditioning? And what's the nature of our stories? Are they forwarding or are they debilitating? Yeah. Do I have to buy a story just because my family told it to me my whole life? No, not necessarily. So stories are only a problem when we don't see them as stories or narratives. Like narratives are usually the water to the fish. We don't see them. And we have narratives about gender and racial identity and class identity and sexual expression, all kinds of expressions, intelligence and how people process things, etc., etc. Yeah, we make up all kinds of stories about ourselves, and then we form all these identities of who I think I am. And these stories, these identities limit the expression of who I am. They limit me, right? It's like I'm binding this part of me and binding this part of me and binding this part of me, and before I know it, I'm in a cocoon. And I have to, I'm engaging with the binding and the identity rather than free form expression of who I actually am. Because who I am is constantly changing, right? Based on my perception at the moment, my mindful experience. Yeah, so we want to hold our narratives about ourselves lightly as well, because who we are is not who we think we are, right? The only thing that we can be aware of is our present moment experience, each moment. The rest is all concocted. Yeah. So what do you make up about yourself, right? Around your physical appearance, around your emotions, your upbringing, your family, your money. We have a lot of narratives around money, work, the earth, our athleticism abilities, our relationship abilities, our personalities. I have a lot of people say, I'm just an introvert. I'm not sociable. Right? It's true that you might be of a tendency towards introversion. Most people in Buddhist practice do. But if I believe I'm an introvert and I'm a very shy person, what are the chances that I'm going to be able to have a dynamic connection with anybody that I don't know? Very small, right? Yeah. So we want to let go of these stories and see them clearly. Try to hold them lightly. There's some truth to them probably, but hold them lightly, not believe them 100%. The one story of that explains the Buddha's instructions, the Bahia Sutta. Bahia at the time was one of the followers of the bark cloth people. They had all these sects, spiritual sects at the time in India. He was living by the seashore in Suparaka, and he was very respected, revered, honored, venerated, and given homage. He took robes. He was a spiritual practitioner. And so the thought arose to him that he was fully enlightened. I am one of those who are arahants, who have entered the path to arahantship, was what he thought. And then a deva, who could hear him, had compassion for him, could see that he was not an arahant. So the story goes that he went to Bahia and he said, "You, Bahia, are neither an arahant nor have you entered the path to arahantship." You do not follow a meditation practice whereby you could be an arahant, right? So Bahia said, well, thank you for telling me. How can I learn to be an arahant? Do you know someone that can, is there an arahant on the earth right now? And the Deva told them about the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, and told them where he was. So he walked for days and days, all day, every day, barely just slept a few hours at night, continued walking to meet. He had this urgency to meet the Buddha and to ask him how he could become an arahant. So he finally found out where he was, and he went to the Lord Buddha. He approached him. He fell down on his to the Lord's feet, to the Buddha's feet, and he said, "Please teach me the Dhamma. Please, Buddha, teach me the Dhamma, so that it'll be so I can be happy for a long time, so I can be an arahant." The Buddha said, "It's unsuitable for you to ask me this now. I'm an alms round." Right? So Bahia, for the second time, said, "Please, please, Lord Buddha, please give me a teaching on how I can become an arahant," for the second time. And for the second time, the Buddha said, "This is an unsuitable time. We have entered among the houses for alms food." The third time, Bahia was very urgent. He had a lot of urgency. He was very, persistent. Third time, he said, "Teach me, please teach me." Right? And so then the Buddha said, "Okay, I will teach you that you must train yourself thus. And the seen is only the seen. And the heard will be merely what is heard, and the sensed will only be what is sensed, and the cognized will be merely what is cognized. In this way you should train yourself. So in the seen, only the seen, in the heard, only the heard." So he went through the five senses, right? When Bahia, in the seen, there's only the seen, and the cognized, only the cognized, and the heard, only the heard, then you will reach full, the end of suffering will be present. Yeah. So Bahia, being a wise person who has spiritual practice, apparently gained enlightened wisdom at that moment. And then he got killed. Within a few hours, he got a mother cow was and the baby were coming down the road, and the cow thought he was going to hurt her calf, so she trampled him. So then they went and they told one of the monks went and told the Buddha what happened, and he was saying he died wise and happy. No one can ask for any more. That's a story. But the thing is, in this story, he's saying, in the cognized, only the cognized, in the seen, only the seen. So he's saying to not get lost in proliferation of stories if you can. Yeah. And that the more we practice, the more we tend to let go of these stories. When we practice, when I first started practicing, I got lost in all my stories. Right now, then I started practicing mindfulness of the thinking mind, and I was able to see, oh, worrying, planning, oh, a lot more planning, oh, now more worrying, wow, there's a lot of fear in this mind. So I was able to start working with the fear and the anxiety and all the different the victim stories. I saw the victim stories where I was either putting myself as the hero or the victim, often the victim. But I saw everything that the mind was making up. And there was a lot that it was making up. And once I saw that this was concocted, it's not even real, it's not based in reality. It's the story creating. We have to see the mind, how it creates all of these different things. And once I saw that it is, this is not real, then my mind I automatically stopped being enthralled with these stories. And I automatically stopped believing all my stories. Yeah. Sometimes I catch myself really getting lost in a story still and believing it. But most of the time I'm like, whoa, look what I've made up here. At work, when I work with my therapy clients, often they're in a treatment center. I sit with the clients and I hear their conditioning, their past lives, and I ask them questions, and I hear they're suffering terribly. A lot of them have had very critical or abusive parents. They hate themselves, feel really badly about themselves. They have high anxiety or bipolar or mental health problems. They're very dysregulated mentally, and I'm trying to help them learn how to regulate themselves, and to bring compassion and kindness and clarity and awareness to themselves. And then they go sit in these groups with other teachers, other therapists. And then the other teachers, they might be sitting there, they're suffering terribly. And I know what's underneath it, right? Because they're telling me. And they might go sit frowning, fidgeting during groups. And one of the other therapists will come to me and say, "What's wrong with your client? He's so rude. He doesn't care about anybody but himself, you know?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, that's not it at all. He's suffering terribly. He's, you know, trying to deal with so much self-hatred or whatever." Um, Yeah, and helping them break down these stories, that these are not their self-hatred stories, their narratives are not who they are. Who they are is beautiful, and who we all are beautiful beings, that we're precious human beings, each and every one of us. We're unique individuals, and yet we're interconnected. Um, Yeah, the way our minds work are all different. The way our bodies move and work and appear are all different. It's pretty much a miracle who each and every one of us is. So we're not our stories. We're not these limited narratives. We're much more. And the more you meditate, the more you'll experience your expansive and spacious and empty and loving and compassionate nature too. That exists as well. But anyhow, thank you for your listening. Thank you for your curiosity and your practice. So I'm going to stop the recording.